Welcome. Welcome to this reflection on Psalm 13. This week we are praying the Psalms of Lament, Psalms of Suffering. We'll begin by reading the psalm. How long will you forget me, O Lord, forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I have anguish in my soul and grief in my heart, day after day? How long shall my enemy triumph over me? Look upon me and answer, O Lord my God. Lighten my eyes, lest I sleep in death. Lest my enemy say, I have prevailed against him, and my foes rejoice that I have fallen. But I put my trust in your steadfast love. My heart will rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for he has dealt so bountifully with me. This is a psalm that springs from a deep grief. For most people, the death of a life partner or other dearly beloved person is the worst pain they have ever known. They do not think they will be able to bear it and continue living. This is what they want to know. How long? How long will this go on? How long shall I have anguish in my soul and grief in my heart, day after day? Joyce Rupp, in her beautiful book, Praying Our Goodbyes, quotes a Robert Frost poem. The rain said to the wind, "You push and I'll pelt." They so smote the garden bed that the flowers actually knelt and lay lodged, though not dead. I know how the flowers felt. And she writes, if you have ever said a deeply significant goodbye, you know how the flowers felt. You know what it is like to have life pelt you with sorrow, to be overwhelmed with emptiness, loneliness, confusion, and sadness. The way people cope is very different. Recently, there was a documentary about grief presented by Esther Rantzen, interviewing people who had all suffered a devastating grief. She herself, 20 years after her husband's death, had simply shut his things away in his outside office, unable to face the pain of looking at them. One man she interviewed, a talented artist, drew his grief as a goblin sitting on his shoulder. He said that now, some time later, he was able to tell the goblin to go and sit in the corner for a while, but it would get out again and ambush him. Perhaps the enemy in this psalm is grief itself, ready like that goblin to attack and overwhelm the psalmist. So the psalmist cries out, "How long, O Lord?" But the incredible thing about this psalm is the change between verses 4 and 5. We do not know what has happened, but something has. A new gift of grace has been given. We do not know either how long the wait was between the verses, an hour, a year, 20 years. At the end of her program, 20 years after his death, Esther was able to look at some of the videos of her husband and remember and laugh and cry. Esther's experience made me think of Mary Magdalene in John's Gospel. The sentence, "But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb." The other disciples have come and gone, but Mary cannot move. She stays weeping by the tomb. But as she weeps, the risen Jesus greets her, and he says to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She can't go back. This is not the man she could touch and hold. But her grief is recognized and understood, and a new grace is given, the presence of the risen Jesus with her, and a new life and a new task awaits. There is no quick, miraculous remedy for grief. The pain may diminish with time, but it's always there, and any memory can bring it flooding back. But the risen Christ is close beside us in our grief and calls us on to a new life and a new task. And the time will come when, even though we will never forget, we can again rejoice. We will again sing our thanks to God, who has dealt so bountifully with us. Joyce writes, "The human spirit is astounding in its resiliency and its ability to recover hope. This is what the resurrection proclaims: the possibility of transformation, the belief that we can be filled with new life, and that the future will bless us." This psalm is short enough to pray in its entirety. It is a psalm in which to pray any grief, your own grief, whether it is a bereavement or another loss or sadness, or the grief of others, or the grief of a world struck by a pandemic. As you pray it, perhaps leave a gap, a space, as long as seems right, between verses 4 and 5, in which you can listen and wait for the voice of God, the voice of Jesus beside you, for the new gift of grace that will begin to unlock your heart and bring hope and healing. Or you might like to imagine yourself as Mary in the gospel story, weeping beside the tomb, and hear Jesus call you by your name and ask you why you are crying. What would you say to him? Tell him all about your grief, and then listen for his response. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.